The problem in Colombia lies in the countryside, in the remote rural areas, with the over 500,000 small farmers who depend on drug crops. If we don't address how to help them with alternatives, we won't stop the drug trade.
Something Luis Fernando knows all too well is likely to be the only way they'll survive in the years ahead. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Cauca.
Well, joined by Juan Carlos Hidalgo. He's the project coordinator for Latin America at the Cato Institute. That's the Washington, D.C.-based think tank. It has almost become a truism, certainly in the U.S., that Plan Colombia and Uribe's war on drugs was a great success. But is that really the case?
No, you have to separate the anti-insurgency factor of the Plan Colombia, which was battling the FARC guerrilla, and the eradication of coca in Colombia. If you look at the first factor, indeed, it has worked.
Not that they really ever admitted that this was about the FARC. I mean, they weren't allowed to really.
No, it was all about drugs.
Right, exactly.
But if you look at the first factor, yes, the FARC are not the threat to the Colombian state that it was earlier in the decade. But if you look at the production and the amount of cocaine leaving Colombia, it's about the same as 10 years ago.
Well, that's very interesting, because we always get a statistic that actually the number of acres upon which coca is cultivated has gone down drastically. So how can that be the case?
60% has gone down, but the productivity, the yields per hectare, have gone up 2/3 in the last decade. So yes, you have less land producing coca, but the land is more productive, so you're basically producing the same amount.
So Uribe leaves office with all this bloodshed and corruption and everything else, with the same amount of cocaine being produced. What about his successor then? Is he aware then perhaps that things aren't as rosy as have been presented?
This week, the president of Mexico announced that he was open for a debate on legalization of drugs. And apparently, according to Mexican sources, according to newspapers, they say that the turnaround in Calderon's position is due because of the president of Colombia meeting him and telling him that Mexico needs to lead the way in a debate, a hemispheric debate on drug legalization. So maybe openly he's not saying so, but apparently in private he shares the concerns of many people who believe that the war on drugs is a failure.
Now that's really interesting, because there's been a pattern in the past where it's only when politicians leave office, when presidents leave office, they say, look, let's be realistic, we have to legalize it, drugs, or at least decriminalize it and so forth. But while they're in office, they're talks. Is that pattern ending now, where people in office can now discuss legalization in a rational manner without fear?
Well, apparently so. And one of the reasons, I think, is that in Latin America is less dependent. Latin American countries are less dependent of U.S. aid and U.S. trade sanctions now than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So they have more leverage in raising their voices and complaining and being more assertive in their foreign policy.
So it was always the U.S. that they were frightened of?
I think so, yeah.
But though President Obama, has a new drug czar who seemed to be saying things which seemed a little bit more understanding of the Latin American position, that the current situation was untenable. Does that make any difference?
They're changing the terminology. For example, they're not using the term war on drugs anymore. But if you look at the budget and if you look at the way they're fighting the war on drugs, it's the same old story.
Juan Carlos Hidalgo, thank you so much.